If you have a favorite astromycologist, I'll bet a week's worth of replicator rations that it's Commander Paul Stamets of the USS Discovery. Anthony Rapp, who breathes life into the character, got his big break playing Mark Cohen in the groundbreaking musical Rent. Rapp wrote a memoir about the experience, which he then adapted as a stage musical, telling the story of his journey in Rent through the lens of two tragic deaths that occurred at the time. Now his one-man musical, Without You, is opening off-Broadway, and he joined me to talk about it. I'm T. Rick Jones, and this is your Daily Star Trek News. Well, thank you very much for joining me, Anthony. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Absolutely.
So how are rehearsals going?
They're going very well. We've, this is a show that I've done iterations of for quite a number of years now. And this time around, we wanted to kind of reinvestigate it a little bit. And so we're not making any huge changes, but we're making some changes that even subtle, when you have a show, it's a piece of architecture. Even if you make one little change, the ripple effects can be quite significant. And so we've just been trying to like tighten the screws and introduce new little ideas that have hopefully the effect of making it that much more seamless, I hope. And that's we're feeling good about it, and it'll be really interesting to get in front of an audience and see how they respond, because the audience response has always been quite strong, but time has passed, and so it's always good to dig back in. Yeah, there's a new song, there's other new little musical moments, there's one of the main in an early iteration, we had very, very minimal use of some projections, but it was always like a sketch. And this time we're going full on into the world of projections and trying to use that to help our storytelling in a way that's not just literal, but that still is, it's a memory piece. So using projection in a way that hopefully is evocative and the spirit of the storytelling, So
it's based on a memoir you wrote in 2006, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote it over many years before that, but it came out in 2006. Yes.
And so then you decided to do a musical, and I want to ask you about that. But first, just for anybody who doesn't know, just do me a favor and give me the elevator pitch. What's it about?
So really, what they both are is a memoir, which to me, a memoir is different from an autobiography. To me, an autobiography is kind of a survey of your whole life, and a memoir mostly is taking a chapter or a piece or a theme of your life and sort of zeroing in a little more zoomed in on it. So for me, that period, the bulk of the book and then really the bulk of the show is it's approximately 2.5-year period from the end of 1994, when I first was cast in the workshop of Rent, and that coincided with my mom's recurrence of cancer. And then doing the off-Broadway and then Broadway production of Rent, losing Jonathan Larson. And at the same time, my mom was then in the last couple of years of her life as she ultimately lost her battle with cancer. So it's these life-changing events, this memoir of these life-changing events that had so much to do with loss, but also, one of the things that Rent is so very much about is that even in the face of loss, you can still live fully. And that honoring people, honoring the memory of those you've lost is as important as going through the grief of losing them. So the book and the show are really an attempt to, tell that story. And I guess I hope lead by example of, by fully telling the full story of what it's like to love and lose the people who are closest to you, and then honor them by telling that story, that can ultimately lead to a sense of growth and honoring their memory.
Is it therapeutic for you as well? Like, did it help you? You were real close to your mom, and I want to ask you about that as well. But was it sort of a therapy for you to cathartic in some way?
I suppose so. I mean, I didn't approach it really. I truly didn't approach it as like a therapeutic endeavor. Actually, writing the book, I felt like for me to write the book, honestly, I had to kind of relive those experiences. I wanted to put myself in those moments, the moment to moment reality of what it was like to have these conversations, to be in these situations. And doing that, I'm not sure it was therapeutic. It was really hard because it was hard enough to go through it the first time, but I didn't see any other way to do it. And ultimately, I suppose, yeah, there was a kind of catharsis with it. But in a way, it was less the writing of it than the releasing of it. When the book came out, I did feel like a sense of letting go of it, and sort of you know, I've seen other writers talk about this with in relation to books, is it's kind of like a child, or a child you send out into the world, or a bird you set free and it flies around, and it's kind of like that in a way that's very different from acting work, you know. Because people then have the book and they're in their home or in their car or their whatever, and they're reading, and it's a very personal experience, but it's like on their terms, it's on their time, and I've just put it out there, and it is what it is. So doing the show is a little bit of a different animal.
Why did you need to adapt the book to the stage, or why did you want to?
Well, I honestly never did think about doing that. I was on my way to do a concert in, like, I think it was 2006 or 2007, not long after the book had come out. And the producer of that concert, the presenter of that concert, we had a long drive to get there to the venue. And on the drive, he's like, "Have you thought about adapting your book?" I was like, "No," because it was such a, I mean, I was proud of the book and I was very pleased with how it had been received, but I really thought of it as a book. It's a very different creature than a theater piece. But he's like, "I don't know, you maybe want to think about it." So I was like, huh. So I didn't know where to begin, because a book is also 300 pages. It's like, I think of a book, I've said this before, so anybody who's seeing this or reading this and hear me saying, sorry, I don't know any other way to describe it. But to me, a book is like a tree. There's the main trunk of the tree, which is these two major events, which is Jonathan and my mom and Rent, kind of, and the way that they collided. But then there's all sorts of other branches you can have in a book. You can spend a page doing a little side bar thing. You can spend a chapter doing a flashback. And you can do some of that in a play, but it's a very different thing to spend real estate, spend time on stage to earn the right to tell more of the story that way. It's like the way you have to establish things, the way you have to earn, it's just, it's a very, you know, an audience hearing things is a very different thing than reading it in, you know, page by page. So I didn't know where to begin, how to start trimming those branches. So my friend and collaborator, my friend Steve Mailer, is a director I'd worked with. We had been looking for another project to do. We really love working together, but like, what are we gonna do? And then so he was somebody that I reached out to. I was like, is this of any interest to you? Because I didn't want to be anybody who had an association with Rent. I wanted it to be somebody like Steve, who was going to be very fresh to all of that material and all of that information and all of that stuff, you know, so he could be really objective about it. And he's like, yeah. So he did me the great service of kind of doing a first pass through of reading the book again, and then sort of bringing out the things that he thought could lend themselves to the show. So once he did that, then I could start to see, okay, yeah, and then I can trim that and put this together. And then it was always going to be the case that music would be a part of it, because there's a lot of music in the book too. There's a lot of lyrics in the book. So it was always like, there's the Rent music, but it's not just the Rent music. There's also the song I sang for my Rent audition, which was Losing My Religion by REM. And then there was a song I'd already written about going home to see my mom while I was doing the show, called Visits to You. So I was like, I think I would like to try putting this in the show and finding a way to do that. And so we did that. And then there were other moments like, I think this could be a song. And so wrote some new material with a couple of different wonderful composers that were friends of mine. So we put all that together, and then we did just a reading. And at that point, I still didn't know if it was going to work as a theater. I really didn't. I was like, this may or may not work. Put it out there, see what the feedback is, and invited some people that I really trusted, I really knew would tell the truth and say, yeah, you probably should abandon this. But all of them were like, no, keep going. There's something really here. So that was I think in like 2007. So it's 15 years ago, now 16, almost 16 years ago, because I think it was, anyway. So yeah, so at that point we started doing more and more, and then we started doing, like we've done over the years, I don't know, several different iterations of it, and it's always been nicely received, and people are moved by it, and it's been very meaningful to get to do it. And then I really, really wanted to do a run of it in New York because it's my home. This is where Rent started. It just feels like that would be a great thing to try to do. And then right when I thought maybe that was starting going to happen, I got If Then. So I did that for a couple of years, and then Star Trek. And then so it's like all these things kind of like, and then, yeah. And then finally it just looked like this window of time between seasons of Star Trek Discovery. There were producers that came on board, that the theater was available. So just everything, all the stars aligned.
I was going to ask you, and I'll ask you now about Steve Mailer. A director's job is more than just telling you to walk here and walk there. And it sounds like he collaborated with you a little bit on how to piece the thing together.
Yes.
Because you're telling a story, and we'll talk more about the story in a second. You're telling a story that's very personal to you, that you lived through.
Yeah.
What kind of, does he help you get there? Like, does he give you direction about emotionally how to do it? Or are you like, I was there, I know how emotionally to back off?
It's more about just like in some of the storytelling conventions, right? So if I'm doing a part of that's where it's more narrated, then he would give me direction. Like, if you activate this part of that narration, it helps us follow what you're saying, you know. Or if in this scene between, you know, and then there's some moments where I'm really playing scenes of dialogue where I'm playing my mom and me. And he's like, he kind of usually asks questions like, does it make sense if this little moment is just a little more this or that? You know, and I want to be true to the moment, you know. So it's very respectful, but it's also like with, you know, making sure it's all in the service of making sure the story is being told as clearly as possible without betraying the truth. So I think we've found a really good way of navigating that. And in terms of style of approaching it too, is like I've seen quite a few one-person shows over the years, and there, you know, and many of them people play different characters, right? But there's sort of like degrees of it. There's the degree where like Anna Devere Smith really totally transforms physically and vocally, very much so. And then I saw there's a wonderful actor named Lisa Crone who did a one-person show called 2.5 Minute Ride. And in that, to me, it was just a little more subtle. It was a little more like when she became her father, it was just a little bit of a physical shift and a little bit of a voice shift, but she wasn't like full on like putting a mask on, you know. It was like filtering through her. And so that was the approach that seemed like it made the most sense for the kind of piece that this is. Because that was also a very, very autobiographical piece that she did, as opposed to Anna Devere Smith, which was like doing interviews with these people and then putting their words on stage. So that was part of the approach too. And then, yeah, technically, like if I'm doing these scenes back and forth, Steve really helps make sure that it's as delineated as possible physically, like enough, you know, it's just to keep track that we're not losing who's saying what when, kind of thing.
Let's talk a little bit about Rent, because that was your big break.
Yes.
Arguably.
No, I mean, it's not I mean, that's true. Yes. Yes.
Jonathan Larson wrote Rent. Rent changed theater. The show itself just changed the way theater could be shown, like shows could be written. And you got through the workshopping process. You were opening Off-Broadway. Opening day comes. What happens?
So we had our dress rehearsal, which is the first. That's like the, you know, like you're in theater, so you know this, but like the dress rehearsal it's a full run through with all tech and everything, and there's an invited audience of friends and colleagues and family and stuff to put it in front of an audience for the first time, but it's not really open to the public yet. So we had that run, and it went really well. And that night, Jonathan, after he went home, collapsed on the floor of his kitchen and died of an aneurysm. Suddenly, he was 35 years old, and he hadn't been feeling well. Like he had a couple days earlier, he had fainted, but it seemed to us that, I don't know, he was probably a little exhausted and maybe, you know, coming down with something, which is totally understandable. You know, it was very exciting, but it was also very stressful and exhausting. So certainly no one thought that he was going to die. And so then the task was, what do we do? He wasn't, you know, when you're going into previews with a new show, especially a new musical, there's any number of things that get changed during the course of it, because now you're in front of an audience. Now you can really have that feedback and learn what's working, what isn't working, get a better, clearer and clearer sense of how to refine what you've created together. And so that was going to be the next wonderful stage that he was also really looking forward to. So we had this, near impossible task for our director, Michael Greif, and our music director, Tim Weil, and our artistic director, Jim Nicola, and all of us in the cast and the band to go, well, we know it's not really 100% done yet. And so everybody we all put our heads together and kept talking about what might changes be, trims and cuts and just making it better. And so we did our best effort to do that, also while mourning the loss of our friend and collaborator. And the show itself is all about this very thing of how do you keep living a full life in the face of loss, in the face of hardship. So it was like the very thing that we were doing, we were performing on stage every night. So it was like the difference between our offstage lives and our onstage lives was tissue paper thin in many ways. But everybody rallied around it in such a profound way and brought their absolute best selves to the process. And I think in many moments of crisis, it can either kind of split people apart, they can kind of fracture, or it can really bring people together. And in this case, we really came together. The show went on to become an enormous success. And I believe in my heart of hearts it would have anyway, because it was that special before he died, but certainly, the fact that he had died brought a lot of attention to the production. But yeah, I think if the show hadn't been as special as it was, then it just would have been like, oh, this is a shame, this really talented person died. It certainly it changed part of the narrative around it, but it still, the show itself had its own impact and power. And now over especially the last year or two, Tick Tick Boom came out on Netflix. It really, for anybody who's interested in knowing more about him, it's a wonderful portrait. It's like a self-portrait. It's a piece that he wrote. He had been starting to work on Rent a bit, but he wrote this piece called Tick Tick Boom about his life as a writer and wondering if he should maybe give up because it was hard and trying to figure out his place in the world. And it's a really beautiful portrait of the very intimate sense of what it's like to be an artist. And I'm just grateful that many more people are getting to know more of his work because of it.
It's a wonderful film. Anybody who's watching, it stars Andrew Garfield. It's on Netflix. There's a lot of theater luminaries that make cameos. Stephen Sondheim's in there,
Yeah.
all kinds of people. So if you're at all interested, go watch it right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fabulous. Were you at all influenced by, because it's not really, Tick Tick Boom's not really a memoir, but it is semi-autobiographical. So when you were writing yours, were you thinking about that? Were you thinking about, Jonathan wrote a one-man musical about his life?
It's interesting. I wasn't directly thinking about it. No, honestly, I was thinking more about I got to do Hedwig a couple times, and it's not tonally our show is very different from Hedwig, but having done Hedwig, the sense of a rock musical autobiography, Hedwig is telling her story with narration and song and playing different characters like that. Having had that experience, I think informed a lot of the approach. And then, like I said, shows like 2.5 Minute Ride, especially Lisa Kron's show, was very helpful to kind of thinking about what the approach or what this thing could be. Yeah, it's funny because by the time I knew Tick Tick Boom, I knew it as like a 3-character play. So it's even though it's I see what you mean. It is autobiographical, but I know that he originally did perform it as a one-person show. Yeah, I will say that doing the show, especially being back in rehearsal, this wasn't necessarily conscious, but I mean, he talked to me and talked to us as a cast about why he wrote Rent, which was in large part, to respond to what he was seeing around him, including the loss of some of his friends to AIDS, and to honor them. And that's so much of why I wrote my show. Like it's this, I'm following in the footsteps of his attempt to do that, to capture truth of a life experience, you know, refract it into a theatrical lens as a way of honoring the people he'd lost.
Tell me about your mother. What kind of person was she?
She was a nurse, which is always like the first fact I say about her, because I think it was so central to her way of being. She was truly somebody who devoted her whole life to caring for others. And in some ways, I think to her own detriment at times. I think that she, you know, she put people first more than herself, which is, I mean, she was incredibly generous that way with her thoughts, her care, her time, her effort, including she was the eldest of 13 kids. So all of her brothers and sisters, the three of us kids that she had with my dad, she helped raise my cousin Rachel from a baby. Like, and then she was a nurse, so she took care of all of her patients. So, and she was a really, really good and dedicated nurse. So that's why I say it the first, because everything else to me falls out of that. We were very, very close when I was a kid. She loved the stuff that I was doing in theater. She was a huge fan of the arts. She was not very, you know, she wrote a little bit, but she was an avid reader, but she just loved the arts. And so she got a lot out of my being involved. And she was like when you know, there's this term stage mother, like, which usually means like people were really pushy, like Gypsy, like the show Gypsy.
Yeah.
She was the opposite. People loved having her around because she was so chill and easygoing, and not like she enjoyed it, but it wasn't for her glory. It was, she just was happy that I was getting to do something I loved, you know. And then as I got older and I was like, there was like some separation. So like I cut the apron strings as a teenager, and then when I came out, like it wasn't like huge amounts of friction and huge amounts of distance, but there was some distance, and those were the gaps that were getting bridged more and more as I was getting older, especially around the time of Rent, and especially around the time of her illness. So we were becoming, it's like, I think of our phases of our closeness is like incredibly close when I was a kid, not quite as close, and then getting much closer again as adults, and a different kind of closeness as adults, to be able to talk about things that much more deeply than we could even when I was a kid. She had an incident in 92 where she had her adrenal gland burst out of nowhere. No one saw it coming. She almost died that night from blood loss and it turned out that it had burst because there had been a tumor there that no one knew was there. But they thought that they got all of the cancer out then. And so she was going to get scans every 3 months. So for 2 years, she was in the clear. And then right after I did the workshop of Rent in the fall of 94, that Christmas was when it recurred. And so from the fall of 94 until May of 97 is when she started like real treatment for cancer. And it was it was protracted. And she was in hospice care for about 9 months. So it was a long journey, much longer than many people face with the situation that she was in.
And she passed. Were you on Broadway yet with Rent?
Yeah, I was. So she was able to come to Broadway opening night. She was well enough. She had cancer at the time, but she was well enough to come, for which I will forever be grateful. And then so that was in April. She lived in Joliet, Illinois, where I grew up.
In Illinois. Okay, so she had to get on a plane and come out to Oregon. Wow.
Yeah. So that was in April of 96, and then she died in May of 97.
Okay. And that, I imagine, hit you hard.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So this story is really about loss. The story of the musical and the book is really about loss. And there are two losses there. One, I imagine, was more acute to you than the other, your mother, losing your mother. How is losing her, and this may seem like an obvious question or a dumb question, how is losing your mother linked with Rent? Because the story is about both of those things.
Yeah.
And so there must be a connection there in your mind.
Yeah, to me, I mean, because she was so integral to my acting life and my acting work, the fact that, this incredible show that I was a part of, that was the last thing that she got to witness, that's a huge link for me. and that the show itself, I mean, for her own sake, the song "Will I Lose My Dignity" had enormous resonance for her. It was very meaningful to her, and it was, so for, on a very personal, sort of selfish note, to know that the last thing she saw me do was something that she really loved and was very moved by, was very meaningful. But then also, being a part of this show and having gone through the loss of Jonathan, and being a part of a show that was so cathartic and in many ways healing around grief, and set an example of how you live with and keep living with these situations, was very helpful. And the people I met because of Rent, there's a woman who's a part of my show too, and in the book, named Cynthia O'Neill, who ran an organization called Friends Indeed, which was the organization that Jonathan based life support on. The things that she was able to teach me and give me as wisdom and support during this time was profoundly helpful. So all of that is part of how these things are linked.
Yeah. And is this is a sensitive subject. So is it hard to go out and tell this story every night, 8 times a week?
It's really, I honestly, I mean, it really, I don't know if this makes any sense. I wondered that myself when I was like, okay, I'm going to do a run of this. What's that going to be like? I'm going to be just like staring at a wall afterwards. And honestly, I feel really, really, really close to my mom when I'm doing the show. I always feel like her presence to some degree, but by doing the show, I'm having conversations with her. I'm like spending time with her. And so, when you lose people, they're gone. Their physical presence is gone, but at the same time, your relationship is still a part of you. So I get to have the gift of like talking to her, and hearing her voice, and hearing her words. So I actually feel very uplifted by it, even though it's still sad. There's moments that are very sad and painful. It's like, but that's part of the whole, and grief is only relative to love. You only mourn things that you really care about. So it's the two sides of that coin are very powerful and meaningful.
I mean, I was wondering, because when I heard you were doing this and I found out what it was about, I was like, why is he torturing himself every night?
Yeah, it really, I promise you, it does not feel that way. It really doesn't. It really, really doesn't. And, over the course of the years that I've done the show, I mean, part of the reason I wrote the book in the first place too was that, especially for young people, there's not a lot of literature out there that's about loss. You usually think of, especially losing parents, you think of it, when you're in your 40s or your 50s is when you probably lose your parents. So maybe that's when you start thinking about these things. But so I remember I did the show in Toronto, and after the show, a young man came up to me and he's like, "My mom died yesterday." And I was like gobsmacked. I was like, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry that you had to watch this show." And he's like, "No, actually, this really helped." So that was also nice to hear, that it's, part of it is, I hope, a kind of avenue or conduit for other people to see a path forward, toward moving through these experiences, and not having to be a thing that you're afraid of, not having to be a thing that's stigmatized or that is shameful or that is like that you should quote unquote get over.
Every season of Star Trek Discovery is a little bit different. They go on these different paths, and different feelings. This, from the trailer, I was at New York Comic Con. The trailer feels to me almost like we're going on an Indiana Jones style. Can you give me any hints about what they're looking for, or anything that won't get you in trouble with the studio?
I don't think I can give you any hints of any specific of what we're looking for, but I can tell you that adventure is the sort of guiding principle, and it was a lot of fun to be a part of that this season. I mean, every season's been super fun for me personally. It's been an incredible thing to be a part of the show, and with these wonderful people. I mean, the whole thing just feels like a bonus round experience. I already had a life-changing experience in my 20s. I thought, if that's the best experience I ever have, I'm done. I'm great. That's plenty. And now I'm having the second round of another incredible life-changing experience. I feel so lucky. But yeah, this year that sense of adventure was permeable, or that's not the word. It permeated. That's the word. Permeated the whole vibe of production. And I think there's some wonderful new additions to our cast this season that I'm really excited for people to meet. Really new, interesting colors that come through. And yeah, so I can't say any more specific, except that is very, what you got from the vibe is an accurate vibe.
Okay, great. And so Culber and Stamets only feature for the briefest of moments in the trailer. Is there going to be some sort of arc for your character specifically, for Paul Stamets?
There is.
Through? Yeah.
Yeah, there's, like, it's like always, Paul is a very, very passionate scientist, right? So he's always looking for, like, what's the next big thing that I can devote my brain to? How can I leave my mark? How can I make a difference? And he's a brilliant scientist, so he wants to do something big. So, I think that's probably the most I can say about, like, how that informs his arc. Yeah. And then, and Hugh continues to be on his path of his own sense of figuring out his path, his sense of discovery of himself in the wake of all the enormous changes that he's gone through in the last couple of years.
Stamets has gone through enormous changes since the beginning. He might be one of the ones that from the beginning, other than maybe Tilly, has gone through the most change, because at first you were gruff and sort of unpleasant, and then we peeled away the layers and found out so much more. Now you're a father, essentially, and your husband died and then came back to life. He pulled a Spock. So he's gone through a lot and become really, really one of my favorite characters.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I feel very, very lucky to have been given such rich material to bring life. And I've never done a regular role in a TV show before, so the feeling of being able to follow a journey of a character and bring to life the journey of a character over time as he evolves is really, really cool. It's a gift as an actor.
So Anthony Rapp, thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure.
Let's just review dates for real quick. Without You, which is written by you and stars you, opens January, or goes into previews January 14th. By the time this releases, you'll already have a few previews under your belt.
Great.
Press opening is January 25th.
Yep.
And you close.
We're selling tickets through April 30th. There's a possibility we could extend.
Oh, great. Okay.
But that's the slate. I believe the theater's still available for a little bit of time, but it all depends on how it all goes. And
sure. I'll put a link in the show notes to buy tickets.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Anthony.
Yeah. Take care.